Hello, everyone. This is David Leon. I'm the Director for Workforce Programs at Virginia DARS, and today I'm going to be speaking with you about using data within your agency. Sometimes people think of it as a dry topic. I have, for years, been a big fan of management information systems and using data to create new programs to find gaps and weaknesses. And that's the stuff we're going to talk about today. I'm not there live to do this in an interactive way, unfortunately. However, if there are questions or thoughts you have after this presentation, I would be happy to talk through any of them. It's a topic near and dear to my heart. I always start, especially for my first session with you all in related to LeadVR, just as a framing and reminder of the work we do and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And I think it's helpful because when you're using data, I like to think about whether or not the things I'm working on are moving us towards this goal. And that is the purpose of the act is to empower individuals with disabilities to maximize employment, economic self-sufficiency, independence, and inclusion and integration into society. Uh, for me, it's a really important thing to remember, especially on those days that don't go the way I'd hope they do. I also like to do a little bit of reminders around how VR is funded. And you might get more of this today from other speakers, but it's really important when we think about data reports, required reporting, and all of that good stuff. Uh, VR is authorized by the Rehab Act of 73 as amended by Title IV of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. The funding is currently administered through the Department of Education's Rehabilitation Services Administration, and 78.7% of that funding is federal, and the state's match is 21.3% of the costs. If you want to learn more about how VR is funded, you can go to the link I've included through rsa.ed.gov. And I want to pause here for a moment so that you can discuss briefly um, whether or not you use certain data elements in your current work, or there are things you collect that go into required reporting for VR. And again, because of how this is authorized, you know, we report out on our outcomes, how we are spending federal dollars. And I thought at the beginning it'd be a nice way to start to take a couple of minutes and think about the work you currently do and what aspects or data is directly tied to reports that are sent in. And they may go to RSA, they may go to your state, some for each. Thanks. Hopefully you have had a robust discussion about some of the data elements. And the reason I wanted to do that before is just because in the last bunch of years, there's been more scrutiny of the VOC rehab program. Every year, RSA reports to Congress and the president about the expenditures and the outcomes of vocational rehab. I've included a link if you really want to get into the weeds and into those annual reports to Congress. To me, they're fascinating. Not everyone will think that. And then I wanted to just touch on the last 5 years. So prior to this most recent year, money had been consistently sent back to RSA in 2021 through 2024. That led to a large number of Disability Innovation Fund grant opportunities. And the reason was that money was still earmarked for voc rehab purposes. But over those years, one of the things you'll notice is that starting in 2023 with the Pathways to Partnerships, um, the money that was earmarked towards voc rehab didn't necessarily go back to state voc rehab agencies. That happened not just in 2023, but also in 2024. And you look at that large amount of money and how it grew from 2021 to 2024. It's a lot of money that was not spent uh, by the voc rehab agencies to serve their participants. However, this year, the good news is that all VR dollars were utilized by the end of reallotment. In fact, agencies asked for more money than was available. So outcomes are improving, all that good stuff is happening. But again, when those reports happen with Congress, part of what people might ask is, why do you need this money if so much is being returned? Um, it's a fair question. Anyway, all of this goes back into the need for data, the need for the work we do, and how we do that work. When it comes to data and reports, there's so many different types. Uh, in my role, I assist with some of our RSA reporting. We have a state rehab council. Many of you may have attended those meetings in your states. If you haven't, I'd encourage you to look at them. I'm sure those minutes are publicly available. Uh, you participate in a combined state plan. You might have FOIA requests. Our current governor requires us to have objectives key results reports that are monthly and quarterly related to different programs. One of the things he's very interested in is apprenticeship growth, and that falls under me. So we track individuals with disabilities who are entering into apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships. Monthly and weekly reports. You have a caseload management system. There are a myriad of reports through that. Budgets, and that might be participant level, caseload level, office level, district or region, agency wide. In my purview, I have three different budgets that I have to deal with: one for a grant, one related to our Social Security employment programs, and then our workforce programs. And they're all very different, but I have to monitor them regularly to make sure I'm not over or underspending, so that again, we end up, at least from my point, not being at risk of giving back money, and also that we're using it wisely. We also use UI wage data, state wage interchange system data, and something called the Vocational Rehab Certified Earnings Report, which is from Social Security. I mentioned caseload management. So in Virginia, we use Aware, and I'm a big proponent of managed layouts that you can uh, print to Excel and play around with. I utilize Power BI, that's also directly tied to our agency data. There are staff who are experts in SQL, and I often work with them around new reports or things I want to look at, especially if I want to look at potential correlations and maybe cause effect relationships between services or programs. In the last year and a half, we have begun using SharePoint more and more, and it has some amazing abilities related to data and reporting. And this is a big one: other duties as assigned. I don't know if you all have that in your job description. I'm not sure if it's actually in my job description, but fairly often, suddenly someone will say, David, I need to know how this affects this, or we're looking at this policy. So data and reporting for policy implementation and development. Are you doing the things you're supposed to? Is a certain policy having the effect you hope it has? And so I want to take another minute and let's pause. And I know I just listed a whole bunch of different reports, but I'd love it if you'd spend a few minutes discussing your familiarity with those, or if there are other reports you use. And if you use those reports, how do you use them uh, related to maximizing the outcomes of your agency, your office, your caseload? So let's pause and have a brief discussion related to this. Thank you. All right, so we've talked about data and some of the ideas behind them and some of the different reports, but you can't really talk about data without understanding what quality data is. And there are a few things that make it quality data. Is it consistent and reliable? Is it accurate and valid? Is it comprehensive? Is the information complete? So an example of that to me that took me a couple years to fully understand the ramifications in Virginia. In our case management system, somebody can begin services with a temporary social security number, a system generated number. And that allows a case to move forward. However, when it comes to reporting things like earnings in the second and fourth quarter after exit, or it comes to checking to see if somebody has social security benefits if they're not sure, or if we are hoping to get a cost reimbursement on that case, none of those things are possible because without the actual social security number, that information is not complete. When I realized what that problem was, it was close to 2,000 people in our system that we didn't have the right information. And it was something it took a few months, but we were able to put things in place to fix that going forward. But again, that information appeared to be complete because the case was allowed to move forward, but it wasn't. So in that case, the information wasn't complete or valid. Um, Also, is the information current? Um, if you are making decisions based on labor market data and outcome projections from 5 years ago today, those decisions are probably not going to be great. And you might make some assumptions that will cause you to advise participants in ways that wouldn't be uh, in their best interest. So, an example of that, when thinking through things like labor market information and assisting an individual develop their IPE, one of the things we look at in Virginia is ensuring that the jobs we are looking at are jobs with a bright future. If you're looking at the ONET, it's another great form of data I should have mentioned on the last slide. If you're looking at ONET data or labor market information, you can find out if their projections for a job are to grow or to retract. Well, if you are using information from 5 years ago and not thinking about how AI is going to change the labor market, you might be leading people into programs or trainings that do have a current credential or measurable skill gain, but those jobs might not be here in another 3 or 4 years. So knowing that the information and the data you're using is recent and reflective of current conditions is really important. Also, is it relevant? You might have really complete, current, accurate, and consistent data related to um, a partner program at a community college. And it could be helpful, but if you're dealing with a caseload of pre-employment transition, that information might not be as helpful to where you're at. You might rather be looking at K through 12 data in your district. There are lots of examples of that. But again, when when you're looking at data, it is helpful to know if it's relevant and current. And that goes to not only when you're making decisions, but if you're looking at a new project or a process, when you're doing that, ask yourself, am I basing the decisions moving forward on these things? And is the information I have accurate enough to move forward? Because sometimes the best thing you can do is say, I need to get a little more information in this area to avoid unintended consequences. The other great thing about this is it teaches you more and more about the agency as a whole when you do this. That's partly why I mentioned the state rehab councils and those meetings earlier in the combined state plan. I'm not a proponent for just saying to folks, hey, read 50 pages to read 50 pages, but the more you can understand your agency holistically and how it is viewed from key stakeholders as well, the more responsive you will be and the more insightful your questions will be. So how do we use data and how can you use it? It can be used for a million things, but I wanted to touch on program improvement. What questions might you ask yourself or your agency if you're trying to, grow your program or do something better? Where would you look for relevant data? That's if you run a program. You might also look for what populations are we missing or where are there opportunities? Um, at the field VRC level, what questions would you ask related to staff engagement in data? And we all have deadlines and required things that have to be done by a certain date. Are you using data to keep on top of those things? And are you using it just to keep on top of those things? Or are you also using it to engage staff so that they become uh, both better consumers of data and creators of relevant data that can be used as you move forward? And let's pause again here and just ask that question. So you see the prompts on the screen. If any of you have had experience in these areas, please share that now. And we'll take about 5 minutes. Thank you. All right, so hopefully you just had a robust discussion on data and maybe how you use it. I also want to touch on how you talk about data and this idea of framing, because you can look at data in a million ways. And so one of the programs I'm involved in is our cost reimbursement. That's the program income that comes back when someone on Social Security benefits works their way off of cash benefits. That brings money back into our agency. We have to talk about it in different ways at different levels. If we are talking to people at our General Assembly or the Secretary's office, downtown, as we like to say, we don't mention the money that comes back because that might make uh, people think that we need less money if we ask for more for match. And that money is not static, it changes every year. So when we're talking to that group, we frame the outcomes related to it as this year, Virginia DAR has helped 493 people work their way off benefits and out of poverty. And that's a really impactful way to discuss that, right? We are lifting the people who choose to come in for services out of poverty. If I'm talking internally to our CFO, I'm talking about this year our cost reimbursement generated $9.2 million in program income that could be used around the agency. And if I'm trying to talk about this to our counselors and I want them to make sure they're doing the things to maximize that money, I say, this is the amount of money that came back that was able to be put back in the system to serve more participants. So that was 3 different ways to talk about one data point. The other thing I wanted to mention related to data and framing is how we do it really can change the perception and decision making. So imagine if you find out you have a diagnosis that requires therapy and you go to see 2 doctors, and Dr. A says, well, here's the treatment protocol I want to prescribe to you, and 78% of people are going to survive with this treatment therapy for 5 years. But then you go to Dr. B, and Dr. B says, well, I'm going to provide this treatment protocol, and 22% of individuals will die within 5 years. That second one does not sound very appealing at all. In fact, I would run from that appointment and be like, I'm not doing that. They're the exact same success rates. It's how you say it. And when we're talking about the individuals we work with, and we're framing a choice, and when we're talking about something we want to do that we think will make the program better, and we frame it, always frame from a positive if you can. I mean, don't make things up. You want the hypothesis and the thing you want to do to be grounded in facts and evidence and the data you have. But if there's a way to talk about it from a positive, people are going to be more engaged and less likely to have that natural response. You know, our human brains work in this way where we all have that kind of fight, flight, or freeze. And you know, once that pesky amygdala starts up, it's going to release a bunch of cortisol and other stuff, and it's going to take someone minimum 90 seconds, a couple of minutes to kind of recollect and be like, all right, now I can listen. So if you go from that positive, you don't have to deal with that usually or as much. All right, the other things related to data that are really important is how you tell that story with data. And as I mentioned a moment ago when I touched on our program income, what is the story in the data that you want to tell? You might be able to tell 5 stories from one process or program you're involved in. And who is the audience? Uh, if you're talking to an internal team, part of your story may be to increase buy-in, to increase awareness, to increase uptake of the work, behaviors, and processes that will maximize that program or outcome. If you're talking to external stakeholders, it may be to get more people to refer to said program. It could be for a whole different reason. And you might want to have a very different story. Even though the information you're using is the same, I like to think of this as, and I haven't done this in a while, but you know, if you are helping an individual apply for 3 jobs and they're all a little different, you are utilizing their same resume, but you are highlighting different things, right? You're tailoring it to that opportunity. And a lot of people don't do this stuff with data. They just, we got this many closures. And that is a fact, right? You can say that. But if you want people to be engaged and to buy into the work you're doing, to support the work you're doing, knowing your audience and the story you want to tell are critical. And then the third thing is what data is important for that story and audience. You know, you have access to a whole lot of information at all times, and uh, you can really get lost in the details. One of the things that helped me the most in the role I'm in now, when I first came to DARS, when we had our former commissioner, who was a wonderful man, Commissioner Rothrock, my former supervisor would not let me go and pitch an idea if I couldn't do it in under 5 minutes. And his attitude was, uh, Commissioner Rothrock is very busy. If you can't uh, determine your story and what's important in under 5 minutes to get to your message, you're not ready to go seek approval to do the thing that you want to do. It's really easy, especially if you are working on something that you've become kind of the in-house expert or you've been working on it for months. You have so much information. It's easy to want to share all of it. But the important thing is that you can answer the questions that come up, not that you pre-answer every question that could come up. And I say that because it's easy to get lost and end up losing your main point. Um, you know, ideally, your story is a short story or an essay, not an epic novel, right? Uh, that's really an important piece. You want to be complete and accurate and current and valid. All right. The next thing you want to do is you've got your story, you've figured out the audience, you know what data is important. Uh, Analyze to make sure it's understandable and that the thing you are trying to communicate is what is being communicated. Again, I'm a big believer in working through a story and data a few times before I share it with the key stakeholders if it's something new. In fact, I don't always do PowerPoints, but sometimes I'll create one just to get my story straight, and I'll ask a few folks to come into a room and let me go through it, and based on their questions, I'll change around my points and make sure it's the way I want it. Uh, Use visualizations if you're going to use a PowerPoint. Sometimes a picture can really help make the point. Also, provide background. Like you really want to develop your narrative. Why this? You've got your story. You know who you're speaking to. You know what data is important, but why is that data important? Why have you spent however long it is to develop this process or proposal? And then again, you've done this, you've got your background. That might be like outcome related data in one region versus another, or the makeup of the population of people served in one area versus another. Um, then you want to make sure your story is organized. Is it in a way that, again, you've done all these things and it's a cogent and clear argument or discussion? And the last thing, and I think this is really, again, the most important thing, it goes back to how I would work with our former commissioner: edit for understanding until it is short and sweet. And so, uh, one of the ways you can do that is, focus on using active voice and not a passive voice in the discussion you're having. But it's a critical step because early in my career, I would get about halfway through this list and think I was ready. And the longer I've been in my current role and the last one, there, you want to make it uh, digestible to your audience in a way that you can then answer questions that may come up and try to anticipate those, but they don't have to all be in the initial story. Because if you tell a compelling story with data and get people engaged, they will have questions, they will want more because they are following along and they can see the potential of whatever it is you want to do. And I'm really excited about this. I know we don't have that much time left, assuming that we had some robust discussions in those other periods. I now want to go through how I did this with a specific program that we now have here in DARS. And I'm really proud of this work. So hopefully this will come through. So I want to give you a case study that happened here in Virginia that I led. And actually, I've updated the data, so I should have changed this to 2024. But here is exactly how I used data for program improvement in Virginia. In 2014, we were finishing a return on investment grant through NIDLR. That's another research area under the Administration of Community Living, and really cool work. And what we were looking at by return on investment was what were the long-term outcomes of people who came through the voc rehab programs. So, we looked at 10 years of wage data for people who had gone through certain voc rehab programs to see, was it worth it? What was the return on investment when we sent someone through voc rehab and which programs? One of the most interesting things that came up in the early findings was that roughly 34% of the people were employed at time of closure but closed unsuccessfully. And I just thought that was really fascinating. And because at that time I was also, leading our cost reimbursement program, it just got me thinking that, I know our commissioner is talks about how many total closures a year, and that's a number for the General Assembly. I know I can see other data because we are getting paid back on cases in program income that we didn't close successfully. Is there a way, now that we know that this many people are exiting and working, but we are not closing them successfully, is there a way to address this? Is it worth even looking at? And so that led to looking more at our UI wage data and how I could use that. And it turned out that I was able to see there was one report where I could see, I could do individual lookups on real-time wage data for people. And we had a use case and a permissible purpose in our data sharing agreement for that UI wage data. So we were allowed. And again, really important. You might find some really cool things you can do, but you want to make sure that they're allowable. Just because you can do something and you see some data doesn't mean you should or are allowed to. That's really important. So I saw that we could potentially look at this. I then looked at our policy language about how we close cases. Like, what else could be stopping someone from being closed if we think they're working? And, Facebook was really big then, LinkedIn, all these other social media sites. So we were able to look and see, hey, here's someone who updated their job. They're not calling their counselor back, right? Anyway, so in our agency, you can't just catch someone working and close them successfully. So just because someone is working, that's the other thing, doesn't mean that we're going to get to that successful closure. In some cases, they came in with that job. There are lots of reasons why that may or may not work. But that led us to develop some different policy language. We looked at some other tools, including the use of the work number, which is a way to see real-time wages. We looked at what social services does around keeping up with folks' phone numbers. So we looked at other state agencies and how they dealt with some of these things. That led us to develop some data we could use that we had access to, identified those data points. We created some reports and we trained some staff. And some of the things we did around this process to develop a cold case unit, that's what we call it, was offices and staff were no longer allowed to close a case unable to locate until they sent it to this unit. Just by sending cases to this unit, that would trigger us to look at wages. And if they had current wages, or as close to current as we could see, we would then look to see if we could find them on LinkedIn or Facebook, other sources. And in many cases, we found people just from that level of data that were currently working in a job related to their goal. So we would work with that referring counselor and say, here's the information we have. We suggest you follow up in this way. That has led to a huge shift in closures. We've also then framed how important and good this program is to our counselors and managers, because we've been able to do a few things. So at the bottom, you'll see the results in the last couple years. And again, this is the part that has to do with framing. So we have, in the last 2 full years, had almost 800 additional successful closed cases that were going to be closed unable to locate. Again, these cases we would have given up on that are now closed successfully. But what's more important to me, and what I talk about with our counselors, we've had over 1,500 individuals that this agency has spent time, energy, and money on re-engage with services to continue to work towards their plan with their voc rehab counselor. So not only are we increasing our closures, but we are getting people who had said they wanted services re-engaged to hopefully get to that successful closure. And in both ways, we are being better stewards of our funds and getting to better outcomes. So that's our cold case unit. If anyone's interested, happy to share more about that. Over the first few years of this, our report has grown and changed so that every month I send out something to our district directors and our FRS director that share how many closures we had this month, um, what we're on track for the year. And at the end of the year, when I send out a final report, I equate that to how many full time caseloads the number of closures equals. So each of our VRCs has a goal of X number of closures. This year, the cold case unit assisted with did the work that's the equivalent of 16 counselors. I'm just making that up. I don't have that number yet for this year. But again, that's another way of framing it. And we did all this with things we already had. So, the first few years it took a lot of work and it didn't work great at the beginning. Some of the things that came up that were surprising to me included staff feeling like we were looking into their work, like it was a gotcha thing. And that wasn't it at all, right? My goal was just, you've done the work. Let's help you get credit. But people get uptight sometimes when you're looking at data or looking at their work. And it took a while to build the trust and to get people to see that this helped them. So one of the early ways we got buy-in was offices that had higher turnover. Oh, you had a vacant caseload for 3 months? Let's right away, everyone that the letter comes back, let's send it to cold case. You know how we'll send a letter, oh, you have a new counselor. This many came back, let's send them to cold case. Let's use this unit as an opportunity to clean up caseloads, to keep things moving, and to make your job easier. So that is just one example. I could give you a couple others, but I think my time is about up. With that, I want to thank you very much for your time today. Look forward to discussing these things and more LeadVR topics over the next bunch of months. Thank you very much.